What happened to Rich Franklin?
Fighting out of Cincinnati, Ohio.
He was a school teacher who left teaching to be a professional fighter.
As long as you stay away from a tornado, you're safe.
Nice. Looking to finish, and it's all over.
That was unbelievable.
I really care about accomplishments as much as I care about being remembered for things like work ethic.
Rich Franklin wasn't just a technical fighter who was a very good athlete. He had a certain level of toughness.
I broke my hand before and I didn't quit. It's a broken arm!
How did a former high school math teacher become one of the most influential fighters of his time? Join us as we explore his incredible rise, his impact on MMA, and why he remains one of the most influential fighters of his era. The rise of Rich Franklin. Rich Franklin's story starts in a pretty ordinary way. He was born to Richard Sr. and Valia Franklin, but his parents divorced when he was just 5 years old. Life wasn't always easy, but Franklin had a solid foundation with his education. After graduating from high school, he went on to earn a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a master's degree in education from the University of Cincinnati. Teaching was Franklin's first calling. He started his career at Oak Hills High School, where he tried to inspire young minds with the beauty of numbers. But even as he stood in front of the blackboard, there was something else brewing inside him. Franklin had always been a fighter at heart. While most teachers spent their weekends grading papers or relaxing, Franklin was stepping into the ring, taking fights wherever he could find them.
He was a school teacher who left teaching to be a professional fighter.
The decision to fight full-time. Imagine this. You're a math teacher with a stable job, a steady paycheck, and a clear path to retirement. But there's a fire inside you that just won't go out. For Franklin, that fire was MMA. He knew he had a unique talent, not just in solving equations, but in breaking down opponents in the cage.
When I think back now at this age of myself who decided to quit a job teaching. Now, keep in mind that I was my father's only son to graduate from college. And my dad, who barely graduated high school, went back to university himself to become a nurse. And so he and I actually graduated from the University of Cincinnati basically the same year.
Oh,
and
that's
so
awesome.
Yeah. He highly valued education. And then so when I basically, after 4 years of teaching, or at the 5 years, including what I did in my schooling, said, "Hey, Dad, listen, I'm going to pursue MMA as a career." Like, he saw me just throwing away my education. He's like, "You're going to just throw away your education."
His first professional fight earned him a mere $200, but it was enough to light a spark. Franklin started to see the potential of turning his passion for fighting into a full-time career. But it wasn't an easy decision. His father warned him about the risk, pointing out that he was trading a secure career in teaching for the uncertainty of professional fighting. Franklin himself had doubts. Could he really make it in this brutal sport? There were moments when he considered hanging up his gloves and returning to the security of the classroom with its pension plans and health benefits. But Franklin had what he calls stick-to-itiveness, the determination to see things through no matter how tough the going got. He decided to bet on himself and his ability to outsmart and outfight anyone who stood in his way. Learning the basics. Franklin's entry into martial arts was no different from many other young guys looking to find their way. He started out in the early 1990s learning karate at the Harrison Okinawan Karate Dojo under the guidance of Bill George and Steve Rafferty. This laid the foundation for the fighter that he would become, a disciplined, strategic thinker with a solid base in traditional martial arts. But Franklin didn't stop there. Hungry to improve and expand his skill set, he began studying submission fighting. Now, this was long before the days of YouTube tutorials and online courses. Franklin learned these techniques the old school way, through instructional videotapes. That's right, he was grinding through hours of footage, practicing moves on his own, showing the kind of dedication that would later define his career. His training wasn't limited to just one discipline. Franklin knew that to be successful in MMA, he needed to be well-rounded. He trained with Meat Truck Inc. and eventually hooked up with some of the best coaches in the game. He trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under black belt Jorge Gurgel at New Generation Martial Arts, sharpened his Muay Thai skills with Neil Rowe at Sakan Martial Arts, and honed his boxing under Rob Radford at Boxing for Fitness. By the time that Franklin entered the professional MMA scene, he was a true mixed martial artist, ready to take on all comers. The UFC Journey Begins. Franklin's hard work and dedication paid off when he made his UFC debut, and he came in hot. Starting his UFC career with a perfect 3-0 record, Franklin quickly made waves in the middleweight division. His victories over seasoned fighters like Evan Tanner, Edwin DeWeese, and Jorge Rivera showed that he wasn't just another fighter, he was a future contender. But it was his fight on April 5th, 2005 that really put him on the map. Franklin headlined the first ever live UFC card on cable TV at the Ultimate Fighter 1 finale. His opponent? The legendary Ken Shamrock. The stakes were high, and Franklin delivered in spectacular fashion, stopping Shamrock via TKO in the first round. This was a statement. Franklin had arrived and he was ready for the big leagues, capturing the middleweight title. With the victory over Shamrock, Franklin had earned his shot at the UFC Middleweight Championship. On June 5th, 2005 at UFC 53, he faced Evan Tanner once again, this time with the title on the line. Franklin emerged victorious, claiming the UFC Middleweight Championship and solidifying his status as one of the sport's top fighters. This victory marked the beginning of Franklin's reign as the middleweight kingpin. He defended his title with ferocity, first against Nate Quarry at UFC 56, where he delivered a first-round knockout, and then against David Lazoe at UFC 58, where he fought through a broken hand to secure a unanimous decision victory. Franklin was at the top of his game, but as every fight fan knows, staying on top is often harder than getting there. Losing the title. On October 14, 2006, Franklin faced the man who would become his greatest rival, Anderson the Spider Silva. Silva was a striking phenom with a skill set that was as dangerous as it was unorthodox. Franklin stepped into the Octagon at UFC 64 to defend his title, but Silva had other plans. And just under 3 minutes, Silva unleashed a brutal clinch game, landing devastating knees that shattered Franklin's nose and ended his reign as champion. The fight was stopped by TKO, and Silva walked away with the belt. Franklin, now battered and bruised, had to undergo surgery for a nasal fracture just days after the fight. But like any true warrior, Franklin wasn't about to let this loss define him. He made his return at UFC 68 against Jason McDonald, where he showcased his superior striking, earning a TKO victory after McDonald's corner threw in the towel. Franklin was back, and he had one thing on his mind: reclaiming his title. Franklin's road to redemption led him to UFC 72 in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where he then defeated top middleweight contender Yushin Okami in a hard-fought decision. This victory earned him a rematch with Anderson Silva, this time in his hometown of Cincinnati at UFC 77. The stakes were high, and the crowd was behind their hometown hero, but Silva once again proved to be too much, using the same clinch game that had devastated Franklin in their first encounter. Silva secured a TKO victory in the second round, effectively closing the chapter on Franklin's pursuit of the middleweight title. Moving to light heavyweight. After his second loss to Silva, Franklin knew that it was time for a change. He decided to move up to the light heavyweight division, where he could then test his skills against a new set of challengers. His first fight in this weight class was against his friend and training partner Matt Hamill at UFC 88. Franklin won the bout via TKO after landing a liver kick that ended the fight in the third round. It was a solid start to his light heavyweight campaign, and it showed that Franklin still had plenty of fight left in him. However, the road at light heavyweight was far from smooth. Franklin faced Dan Henderson at UFC 93 in Dublin, Ireland, losing a close split decision. The fight was controversial, with many fans believing that Franklin had done enough to win. Despite the loss, Franklin continued to push forward, taking on one of the sport's most feared strikers, Wanderlei Silva, at UFC 99. In a back-and-forth war, Franklin emerged victorious, earning a unanimous decision in a fight that left both men battered and bruised.
I retired, but I've had a long layoff and all that kind of stuff. I was scheduled to fight Kong and ended up with Wanderlei in Brazil. I think this was a much more difficult challenge, especially after the long layoff that I had, having not fought since February of last year with Forrest, and then dropping the weight also from 205. At this point, when you get dropped, things in the fight just start getting jumbled. So really, I'm going to have to go back to the tape with my coaches, Rob and Neil.
Legendary battles. Franklin's career continued with high-profile bouts, including a tough loss to Vitor Belfort at UFC 103, where Belfort caught Franklin with a powerful left hook that led to a first-round TKO. For his next fight, initially there were rumors swirling that Franklin might square off against the equally legendary Randy Couture. But when Tito Ortiz pulled out of his scheduled fight with Chuck Liddell, the UFC had to make a quick decision. Enter Rich Franklin, who stepped up to the challenge, setting the stage for an epic battle to the table, showing off improved striking and even more effective kicks. It looked like Liddell was back to his old self, and as the first round was coming to a close, he connected with a solid head kick that had Franklin in trouble. Liddell, sensing victory, moved in to finish the job. But here is where Franklin's experience and fight IQ came into play. Despite being rocked by the kick, and as we would later find out, fighting with a broken left forearm counter right hand, it was compact, precise, and powerful enough to send Liddell crashing to the canvas, ending the fight at 4 minutes 55 seconds of the first round. Just everyone why he was one of the best to ever do it. At the post-fight press conference, Franklin revealed that his arm had been broken by that head kick. Yet he pushed through the pain, showing the kind of toughness that defines a true champion. Fortunately, the injury did not require surgery, allowing him to recover quickly and get back into the octagon sooner than expected.
Franklin's most memorable fight for me.
Trying to get away. He's down. Franklin has done it. I broke my hand before and I didn't quit. It's a broken arm.
Next up for Franklin was another tough challenge, this time against former UFC light heavyweight champion Forrest Griffin at UFC 126 on February 5th, 2011. Griffin, known for his relentless pace and never back down attitude, was a tough matchup for anyone in the division. The fight was a gritty back and forth affair, but Griffin's size and strength and advantage played a significant role. Franklin fought valiantly, landing some good shots and defending well. But ultimately, Griffin's pressure and clinch work earned him the unanimous decision victory. For Franklin, it was another tough night at the office, but as always, he took it in stride, learning from the experience and moving forward. Never one to turn down a fight, UFC called on Franklin to save another card, this one against his former foe, Vanderlei Silva. The bout took game plan ultimately earned him the unanimous decision victory, but both men walked away with Fight of the Night honors for their incredible performances. The final fight. After his successful rematch with Silva, Franklin decided to make a return to the middleweight division, where he had previously held the title. His opponent? Former Strikeforce Middleweight Champion Kung Lee, a fighter known for his flashy kicks and unorthodox striking. The fight took place on November 10th, 2012 at UFC on Fuel TV 6, with Franklin headlining the event. Lee was a dangerous opponent, and in the opening round he caught Franklin with a perfectly timed right hand that sent him to the canvas. The fight was over in an instant, marking one of the few times in Franklin's career that he had been knocked out cold. It was a tough loss for Franklin, but in true warrior fashion, he handled it with grace. Little did we know that this would be the last time we would see this legend inside the octagon. Retirement from MMA. You see, every fighter knows that the time will come when they have to hang up the gloves, and for Rich Franklin, that time came in 2015. After teasing the possibility of one more fight, Franklin ultimately decided that it was time to call it a career. On September 28, 2015, he announced his retirement from MMA, penning a heartfelt column on the Players Tribune where he explained his decision. In the article, Franklin talked about a conversation he had with his mother, which helped him realize that his body had slowed down and that it was time to step away from the sport he loved. It was a difficult decision, but Franklin knew it was the right one. He left the sport with his head held high, having accomplished more than most fighters could ever dream of.
Rich Franklin, I heard he retired today. When mixed martial arts was misunderstood, Rich Franklin was a great example of what a mixed martial artist really was.
New UFC Middleweight Champion Rich Franklin!
I think the thing about Rich that made Rich stand out was that he was a school teacher. At the time, people had this idea of what they thought a UFC fighter would look like, would act like.
And the accolades didn't stop there. On April 13th, 2019, during the broadcast of UFC 236, it was announced that Rich Franklin would be inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. It was a fitting tribute to a man who had given so much to the sport, both inside and outside the octagon. Life after MMA. Retirement from fighting didn't mean retirement from life for Rich Franklin. Known as a thinker and entrepreneur, Franklin explored new ventures while still competing. In 2002, he co-founded American Fighter, a clothing brand that grew from t-shirts to a full athletic line. By 2012, Affliction Clothing acquired the majority of the company, bringing it to mainstream success. In 2013, Franklin launched Z-Lin Organic Juice Infusion Cafe, later pivoting to bottled juices after its closure. And in May of 2014, Franklin took on a role that many believed he was born for when he signed on as a vice president at One Championship. Rich Franklin's TED Talk. What sets Rich Franklin apart as an ambassador for MMA isn't just his outstanding career. It is how he reshaped the image of the sport and brought a fresh perspective to the life of a cage fighter. If you really want to grasp who Rich Franklin is and why he has had such a lasting impact on MMA, his TED Talk at the University of Chicago offers powerful insight. In it, Franklin dives deep into the topic that every fighter, and frankly every person, has to face: losing. In the world of combat sports, losing is a given. No matter how well prepared or talented you are, there is always a chance that someone might be better on a particular night. But what makes Franklin's view on losing stand out is how he turned his defeats into life lessons that went far beyond the octagon. Franklin starts by challenging a phrase we've all heard a million times. It doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Growing up like many of us, he was taught that winning was everything. In his early days, it was all about getting the W, and losing wasn't really part of the equation. But that mindset took a major hit after he lost his UFC title. He describes that loss in vivid detail, explaining how it felt like he was sinking in quicksand. One mistake led to another, and before he knew it, the fight was over. Franklin was left questioning everything: his abilities, his purpose, and even his future in the sport. He hit rock bottom emotionally and mentally, struggling to find his footing after such a devastating defeat. But here is where the story takes a turn. Franklin talks about a visit to Walter Reed Hospital, where he met a veteran who had suffered severe injuries. Despite his situation, the veteran had an incredibly positive outlook on life. This encounter was a wake-up call for Franklin. He realized that his loss, which felt so huge in the moment, was insignificant compared to what this veteran was going through. It shifted his perspective completely, helping him see that how you handle defeat can be even more important than how you handle victory. This outlook on life, winning and losing, is what makes Franklin a true legend of the sport. While some fighters like Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor have been criticized for their inability to accept defeat, Franklin embraced his losses and used them to teach others how to cope with setbacks on the biggest stages. His approach has not only set him apart but also inspired countless others to rethink how they handle their own battles, both inside and outside the cage, redefining what it means to be a fighter. So what did Rich Franklin's run in the UFC really mean? Sure, he was a champion, a fighter with a list of victories that would make any athlete proud. But his significance goes much deeper than his win-loss record. Rich Franklin shattered the outdated stereotype that MMA fighters are all brawn and no brains. A former math teacher with an articulate demeanor, Franklin showed that fighters could be intellectual and strategic, not just physically strong. UFC President Dana White often cites Franklin as proof that MMA athletes are more than just physical specimens. Franklin emphasized that being a successful fighter requires intelligence, strategy, and the ability to understand both the sport and the business side. His approach helped reshape the perception of MMA, proving that fighters could be thinkers, entrepreneurs, and role models beyond the octagon.